Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio.
And welcome to Feminist Book Club. We're a little late on this one because we had so much good stuff for February. And it's a small month, including our return on one of our favorite peoples, Bridget. So we pushed this back a little bit. So we're just going to say we're extending Black History Month and letting it overlap with Women's History Month as it should. So we're just going to blend the two. From February to March to fully celebrate all of that. And that means we are going to do an amazing short story collection. I'm so excited. I love short stories so much.
I do too. And I love when they have little pieces that connect to each other. And this one does. Sometimes, yeah.
I feel like they overlap in so many characters, including cats. So at the very beginning of this, let's go ahead and put content warning. There's a lot of heavy subjects in this one. I will tell you, for me, it was a slower listen/read because of the intensity of the subjects. So we're talking about enslavement and slavery. We're talking about death and murder, even death of animals, sacrificing of animals, which, by the way, I was not in a great place for that.
No.
I will tell you this. A lot of historical context that bring a lot of sadness. So just as a reminder, if you need to take time, you should, but you should absolutely read this book when you can get into a good headspace. If you can, since it is a short story collection, you can read one, put it down, come back. So, you should absolutely do this. And we are talking about Tananarive Due and her first short story collection, Ghost Summer, which was published as the actual collection in 2015. But a lot of these stories she's published previously. So I know some of them go as far back as 2000. And even though that doesn't sound like a long time ago to me, it actually was 25 years ago. So, oh dear God. So anyway, all of that to say is an amazing collection of works. But not only is she a writer, she's a professor of Black horror, as well as executive producer for documentaries such as Horror Noir, A History of Black Horror, which I think was featured on Shudder. And she's also a screenwriter with her husband, who has also collaborated with her on several stories within this collection. So really, really great. If you have the time, like I said, it is ghost stories. It is very haunting. Even if it wasn't, and it was just like historical tales, it's still haunting.
Yeah, it creeped me out, to be honest. And I loved it, but it creeped me out. We've been trying to read something from her for a long time, because she comes up on a lot of lists, and we love horror here.
Right.
So I was very, very excited to finally get to do it.
She has another short story collection, which we need to revisit anyway. But yeah, so this is going to be a long, detailed look at this one collection called Ghost Summer. What we're going to do, because they are short stories and they're kind of interlinked, but not necessarily interlinked through theme. I mean, there's definitely a common theme throughout, but with that, we're going to do a synopsis of the story, and then we'll do the theme after that story immediately. So instead of doing our typical tell you the plot, tell you what's going on in the book, and then do themes and have a discussion, we're going to do it as we go per story. So let's write down the stories and do the themes. We're going to start with the first story. We are going through the order that she has them in the book, including, I believe, the 3 towards the end, not the last 3, but towards the end. They are actually collection together. Yeah. We'll let you know which ones, though. So we're going to start with The Lake. And I'm telling you, it hits hard and fast at the very beginning. Yes. So FYI. So this first story, again, came out with a bang, not only confronting us to the horrors and suspense of a lake. And if you know about haunted lakes, you understand us from Georgia. We know about haunted lakes. Lake Lanier is a legend in itself, as it should be. And it has a lot of that dark history that Due actually talks about often throughout her stories, but also inside the mind of a sexual predator. So we have teacher Abby LaFleur, who just moved to the town of Gracetown, and there she escaped from her previous area, moved near a lake to her new home. She was isolated, but she had a new start. As she made plans for the upcoming school year, she enjoyed her new home and her new lake. Though the town knows better than to swim during this time, I think it's summertime. Is it summertime?
It's all summer, yeah.
Yeah, summertime you don't swim in the lake. She goes for it anyway, even though she's not a great swimmer. Soon she becomes an avid water person. All the while she has met her new students and has focused on one specific young boy. But at the same time, she's also become obsessed with the lake, and the lake was becoming obsessed with her, or better, possessing her. Her feet got larger, and she starts to grow webs on her feet, and then there's this need for her to be in the water. She even has dreams of it. Going back, soon she starts having the young boy, whose name is Derek, come over to help remodel the home, and I'm putting that in quotes. He and his cousin start coming to help and fix her home, which also turns into them going and swimming in the lake, even though the boys know better than to go swimming in the lake. There, her bloodlust hits, and she is contemplating on whether to give in to her new desire to eat one of the young boys. And that's how it ends.
Yeah, it ends with like it sounds like that's what's going to happen, because she's like, I can see the scandal play out now. I could have avoided it if I hadn't torn open his stomach. Like,
right.
Whoa, yeah.
Like, she has this back and forth of like, he's someone's son. He hasn't lived his life, blah, blah. And it wasn't Derek, the original boy, actually. It was the cousin who dared to go swim with him. It was, so Due wrote this at the end of each story. She gives a kind of like a summary, a little bit about what it's been published in, as well as some of her thoughts or the reason she wrote it, the theme. She might have been given a prompt about what to write. And this one she wrote, this was using the prompt or theme of monster's perspective. And she talks about being a true predator. A sexual predator was the one she used as her monster.
Yeah. So here's the quote from Due. The theme, stories from the monster's point of view. Some of my favorite stories have been written to themes from places I would not have explored otherwise. The first monster that came to mind, a sexual predator. If only real monsters grew webbed feet and gills.
So, and I don't talk about the different perspectives because obviously it's a lot. I don't want to reread the story to you. I want you to tell you what it's about, but you need to go back and reread. One of the perspective is that she has a close coworker as well as a friend who has been accused also of sexual advances to a young child, so being a child molester, one of her students as well, and she had to run away from that scandal, which that scandal had that point of like eating up young boys, essentially. But yeah, and how she didn't want that to follow her. She got away from that, but her friend wasn't so lucky type of conversation. So it is really interesting. It's an interesting perspective because we also don't see oftentimes when teachers who are women who prey on young boys are seen as predators. Oftentimes they're seen as like femme fatales type of thing, in that level of being sexy and seductive and almost like idolized in that. Yeah. It was really refreshing to see this perspective of seeing her as a monster, as a predator, as she should, if she is, honing in on young boys and plotting for these young boys. But yeah, like I said, the first story hit with a bang. I was like, well, damn.
Yeah. Yeah, it sure did. And I have to say, we didn't say this at the top, but one of the things I really liked about this book is it's so many different genres. So many different things. So here I am, I'm reading this, like, oh, okay, monsters. And then different things, a lot of different things happened.
Right. And I love that too. I think she does such a great job in overlaying what horror can be, whether it is monsters or apocalyptic or ghosts.
Yeah.
Or possessions.
Yeah.
It's good. She also has a common use of places and lands and people.
Yeah.
So I don't always know because we're about to come into another story and it's going to also feature fictional place of Graceland, which is at the border of Florida, near Georgia border. So there's so many things here. She also talks about like I-285, which if you're from Atlanta, you know. And like, I'm like, I think I could find that spot. Atlanta Highway. I was like, yeah, that exists.
Yeah, it's very Southern. A lot of it is very Southern based.
Yes. So it's really interesting. We were like, hey, I know where that is. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
At one point, we were talking about Annie's hometown even.
We are.
But anyway, so that's the lake. So she's got us with that very beginning of like, well, here you go. It's some deep things here. And we're jumping into the next story called Summer. And in this one, we have Danielle and her baby Lola, who have come to Graceland while her husband Carl was gone with the military. She came back and lived in her late grandmother's home. Lola, the baby, seemed pretty fussy and who didn't mind seeing her mom in pain, would laugh when things would happen, like grabbing her hair, grabbing her earrings, making her bleed. Like, so pretty fussy baby. At the same time, in this area, she's talking to all her people that she knows, and they talk about deaths in the area. 7 bodies have been unaccounted for, and the McCormicks, an old white family with a lot of rumors around that area that they are involved in this. So when I say old white family, this family is the quintessential owned slaves, had money from that era, and was not apologetic. So that's that. We have Odetta, who is Danielle's older cousin, who kind of helps her throughout this time, and one of the only family members that she gets along with. And she talks about the swamp leeches, which here's a quote from that. Swamp leeches are different. It's just a name Mama used to call them by. You could call them lots of things. Mostly, people call them demons, I guess. So these leeches possess you. And though Danielle doesn't really believe her, soon after, we find that Lola has been possessed, to the point, like, the tale goes that something comes to get them. Lola, the next day, seems weirdly perfect. And when she's changing her diaper, a leech comes out. And she's like, oh my God. So she's screaming and of course, all the normal reactions I think you would have after seeing that. And Lola becomes a whole different baby who adores her mother, or pretends to, as in like she knows this is what normal babies should be doing. Mm-hmm. And Danielle goes to Odetta and Odetta's uncle to get help. And they are like, they really treat this like, it's not a big deal. Yeah. And it's not your typical demon possession where they're trying to do anything bad. No one knows why. They just stay around for maybe a couple of years, and that's it. And then they just leave.
I thought it was just summer.
Was it summer? I thought it was a couple of years.
It could be. But it's summer is when it happens.
Yeah, summer is when it begins. Yeah.
But it goes away.
It goes away. And there's nothing that happens to the baby. Lola is fine. The child may never remember. But that the entire time, the child will be well-behaved, who acts like they adore the mother. She even can repeat words. Mm-hmm. So all these different things. Soon, but, Danielle's freaking out. She wants a remedy, whatever. But the remedy is not like anything she knows about. So she doesn't quite know what's in this remedy that the uncle has. So Danielle gets it, though, and takes it with her. And she debates whether or not to give it to her at all. So.
Yeah. Because it's nice, because her baby was so mean to her.
Yeah. So Due speaks about her own experiences of motherhood and its many challenges, but also opens up to the histories of enslaved people and the many who went missing. So that is also a theme that we're going to go back into in the next story. But just like, and I think we've had like the historical amounts of people. I know a lot of the stories from Mississippi and Alabama, and I'm sure there's some in Georgia, but for some reason I hear the Mississippi, Alabama versions of like mass graves of enslaved people who just went missing and disappeared, and that were just covered. Lake Lanier, like there's tales of. So that I do know things from Atlanta, I guess, from Georgia. Lake Lanier, like that the entire area, which was mainly like a Black community, was flooded. And so there's literal houses under that lake. So
there is a horror movie about it. I don't think, I haven't seen it, so I don't know if it's any good. But there is a horror movie about it, and there is a podcast about it that my friends listen to. And it's funny because they pronounced it Lake Lanier. They did something interesting with the pronunciation. But yes, it has been discussed.
I think it's a French name, right?
I always thought it was, but
I think it is. So we definitely don't pronounce it right.
No, that's the funny thing. Is, when you're from a place and it's not like you're pronouncing it correctly.
No, we're definitely not. But
it's how it's pronounced.
Yeah. I mean, we had that moment. We're going to talk about your hometown, Dahlonega. He says the correct pronunciation. I was like, I never knew that. And that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. But that's just not how we pronounce it.
But with all of that does come up. And I think it was something that we need to note because Due does use her historical own history as well as the area's history of enslavement and the people who've been mistreated and abused or ousted throughout her stories. And though that's not the central theme, obviously, that's definitely a theme. That's something that needs to be said, needs to be told. And she does a great job in intertwining those tales. So very good. But yeah, this one is about like, what would you do? And she talks about her own experiences with like, man, I don't know. If that baby stopped crying for a minute, I might be okay. And it didn't really harm them. Why not?
Yeah. And it's also like, I think the baby just doesn't really need to sleep or eat. No. It's just quiet, like
happily staring at the mother and just staring. That would unnerve me. Just having them follow me around, staring at me the whole time, smiling, smirking.
Yes. And it was interesting how Odetta and the uncle were so, it's fine, whatever. And at first, Danielle was so freaked out. But by the end of the day, she was like, oh, this is nice. I was taking a nap.
Yeah. Like she's not fussing and her hair is looking good and she looks like a really well-behaved baby as before people would give her looks. And she was getting compliments all of a sudden about how great of a baby she had. Yeah. And, that does feed a lot. Like, I get that. Because it does feel like just a person who take care of children and had children as a nanny, like, even though it was obvious that they weren't mine, like, if they misbehaved, it embarrassed me, and I would give them the mom look, and they would calm down. Because I'm like, do not embarrass me. So, like, you understand that level of, like, needing that peace. Because you get judged as a mom or a caretaker if the baby is unhappy. God forbid, they make a loud noise, Like, it is definitely an understanding moment of, like, oh, this is peaceful. If I could just have this. Because she also talks about the fact that her husband is gone, but when her husband is around, the baby is so much better.
Yeah. She really thinks the baby hates her. And she
does be postpartum.
She talks about that a little bit too, but dismisses it pretty quick. Like, no way, I'm too strong for that.
Right. A lot of themes in that short story. It's not even that short. None of these stories are that short, but definitely, like, I believe the next one is actually could be qualified as a novella. I think was a novella.
Yeah, it's much longer.
So this one's a little longer, a little more detailed. I will say this one got me. Like, I was like seated where I had to be like, I can't get up yet. I have to keep listening. I can't do this other thing. So I have to finish the story. It was one of those. So it is titled Ghost Summer. And we meet Davy Stevens, a 12-year-old boy whose mom is from Ghana and father from the U.S., Gracetown, specifically. His mom had decided to go back to Ghana to see her family for a few months while he and his younger sister, Nima, went with his dad to visit his grandparents in Gracetown. Now, yes, they went with him, but all of this was a weird setup in which Davies and Nima had a choice of whether or not to go to Ghana with his mom or go with their father, and they chose to go with their father. They had reasons, and we're about to find out the reasons, but it almost looked like his mom was hurt that they chose that, but she accepted it. And it's like the way that they said goodbye was odd. He was just kind of like, I honestly expected her to die in a plane crash or something, or that she was already a ghost. Yeah. I thought she was a ghost the way it began. Yeah, I was like, what's happening? But it did not turn out that way. But the way it was set up, I was ready for it.
Yeah,
it wasn't. But he was excited. Oh, his older sister, who was also kind of around, was heading to Northwestern for the summer, so she didn't care either way. He is excited to go, not because it was fun, because there were ghosts, and he wanted to be able to record and prove the existence of ghosts. And so during this time, it turns out any child that is under 12 can see ghosts. But after that age, you no longer see them. And so his older sister even talks about it. She had seen them as well, and she knew what he was talking about, and she believed him. Other adults oftentimes would believe him as well. Not necessarily the grandmother. The grandmother didn't remember anything. I don't think she was actually from there. I can't remember. His grandfather was, and grandfather wanted to leave and run away. And then they did for a while, but then came back. I think they went to Miami and came back. His father was not there during his childhood. They had left, and because the grandfather refused to be there with him.
Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of that setup. But when they retired, they decided they wanted more land, more space, like all that, and came back to Gracetown. So all of that. However, at Gracetown, he discovered that his mother and grandfather were possibly separating. He says the D word, as in divorce, and that he and his sister may be moving to Ghana. But soon he was distracted by the ghosts. So all these overlaying traumas were happening. He was both excited about ghosts and then scared about the ghosts, but also hearing about the divorce that's happening and his father breaking down and possibly losing the children. All of those things were happening at the same time. He had ran into 3 young boys in the woods, and it looked like they were burying their dog. So he got the attention of the youngest one, but they didn't react much. He just kind of looked away. So after that, he was like, you know what? I'm gonna go. So he leaves. Soon after, he heard what sounded like a dog sniffing at his doorway. So bedtime has happened. He's in bed, and all of a sudden, he's hearing dogs sniffing at the door. In fear, he tried to stay quiet. But the next day, he realized, I missed my chance. So he decided he needed to see and prepare himself with dog biscuits and flashlights and video recorders and other recorders and all that stuff. So he was ready. He was on the ghost hunt. He decided to stay up in the living room, but during all of this, Nima decided she wanted to join as well, so he let her. And she did a pretty good job. At first she was whiny, but then soon she was into it.
Mm-hmm. That
night, not only did they hear the dog, but they also saw 3 young boys walking through the waters away from the dog. They felt the water. That night, they felt the dogs, heard the boys, and tried to follow them. And Davy was able to capture an image through a doorway. All the while, we find out that there's a redevelopment near the McCormick land. So the McCormicks are back. This is the white family that had slaves on their land and would not admit they did anything wrong. But his grandma is against this and have attended the meetings to try to stop this redevelopment. We learned that there's a dark history of the land, and that is why conversations of bodies being missing and buried in this area has been around for a while. And during a fateful visit to the library, Davy discovers the history of what was happening. 3 young boys had gone missing, and many blamed that on the McCormicks. The young boy's father, Isaiah Timmons, a Black man who was somewhat successful in the area, and had dreams of leaving Gracetown and being with his brother in New York with his family. So because he was somewhat successful, and I don't mean really successful, he was able to work and get money and save some money and have land. And that was successful to them. Many of the white people, including the McCormicks, really hated him and took advantage of him. Like wouldn't pay for things, wouldn't pay for his services, would like all those things. But soon there was a fire that took Timmons' barn. So there was a barn fire. Timmons decided they needed to leave immediately. Isaiah was sure it was McCormick who had done this out of spite and racism and hate, and he just wanted to get his family out for safety. Like he was like, I'm so grateful that no one got hurt, but this is a warning. This is a warning. We have to go. And as they were preparing to go, the 3 boys disappeared without a trace, which ended with the murder of Isaiah, and his disappearance, and a murder of a lot of Black men in the area because he had, in his fit of trying to find the boys, he had pointed a gun at McCormick, and that enough was a death sentence for him and other Black men in that area. So Essie, Isaiah's wife, is in mourning, and she stays behind to try to search for the boys. And during this time, she also has a young daughter with her, but like the young daughter kind of gets cast aside because she is in such mourning and trying to find the boys. So that's the story of the Timmons kids. At the beginning of the story, we find out that where his grandparents' house was a swamp area. So that's why the water comes into play, and that's why they fill it. So with that, his time with his grandfather and father, they proceeded to do their hunt. The waters returned, and the boys and the dogs. However, once again, the older men, the adults, could not see or feel any of this. It was just Nima and Davy explaining what was happening as they were going about. During their hunt, they hear a horrible shriek and stop the search. That to the point that all of them, the that Nemo got very scared, and so they stopped, and as well as Davy, obviously, but Nemo was the focus point. So the next day, even though Grandma wasn't happy, they talked her into allowing them to have another hunt. So she was like, you know what, if you're going to do this, I'm going to give you more supplies, including a rain jacket and a more powerful light. She's like, if you're going to do this, you're going to have snacks. And they did. They had snacks and all these things. I'm like, yes, Grandma, prep them up. That night, the four went searching again. This time, the noise and the shouts and things were so loud that the windows in the house cracked, 2 of them. Grandpa was not happy. He didn't hear anything, but saw, obviously, the window cracking. He was like, what are you doing? Like yelling at the ghost. Quite funny almost. And Grandpa was like, I'm done. Because at this point, the ghosts and the dog, there's a dog in this whole thing, have gone outside of the house. And he says, I'm not leaving. I'm going to sit here. Y'all do your thing. So Dad agreed, which was very surprising for Davy, to go and follow them into the woods. And they go together. Nema, Davy, and the dad go into the woods. And at this point, we know that the barn fire from years ago actually wasn't because of the McCormicks. No, we learned that it was an accident that the 3 young boys had caused while they were cooking and having a food fire. They were afraid to admit it, and thought it would be better for Dad to believe it was the white men. You know, like, you know what, we're going to let them be blamed. They probably would have done it anyway, so we're going to go ahead and say, yeah, sure. But when they found out they would be leaving the next day, the oldest one wanted to say goodbye to his girl. So we have this conversation about him, like, need to say bye. It's his girl, you know, all these things. So he snuck out with the other 2 who had begged to come with him that night. Unfortunately, they had to cross McCormick land, which was guarded by McCormick's German Shepherd. And soon the boys ended up being chased by this very giant, mean dog who they said the McCormicks had trained to hate Black people. So as Davy, his father, and Nema followed the ghosts, they realized that they too were being followed by this dog. They were being now hunted by this dog. Nema is bitten by the invisible dog, and slowly their father, who has never heard of these ghosts or had never heard or seen these ghosts, all of a sudden can hear them as well. And he can hear the dog. He's freaking out. He's like, what is going on? And he can feel the waters for the first time. And as they try to escape the dog, going the same direction as the 3 young boys, the ghosts, Davy is attacked as well. Dad attacks the dog with a shovel, and they try to escape. Davy then falls into a giant hole, but is saved by roots that his jacket gets caught on. And this hole was from like an older building that had caved in a long time ago. There, Davy sees 3 sets of eyes at the bottom of the darkness in that hole, just staring back at him. His dad was able to get him out of that hole, thank goodness. And then they were still running away from that dog, so they ran to a nearby barn and locked the doors. So the next day, they're found by a rescue crew, and they tell everybody what they discovered, including Davy saying, I know where the boys are, and I know what happened to them. A crew came and dug up the hole, where they found the bodies of the 3 boys, a mystery that had finally been solved. The boy's sister, who had stayed to get justice, watched as they pulled out the remains. And as Davy is leaving, because they had come back to witness the digging, they all give him a standing ovation for his heroism.
And this one Due has a real interesting connection to. She said, this story and the previous one, Summer, are a kind of odd prophecy. In 2013, I received a call from the Florida Attorney General's office informing me that my late mother, Patricia Stevens Due, had an uncle, Robert Stevens, who probably was among dozens of children buried on the grounds of the Dozier School for Boys, a reform school in Marianna, Florida, where boys were tortured and killed for generations. I had never heard of the Dozier School, buried children, or Robert Stevens, my great-uncle who died there in 1937 at 15. But months later, my father, husband, son, and I would go to the excavation site in the woods in Marianna, where University of South Florida researchers sifted through the soil in search of bones, just like I had written in Ghost Summer 5 years earlier.
Right. That's such an interesting, like, what?
Yeah.
That this was so personal to her, but she'd written this beforehand. Is like, wow. And that takes place in Florida.
Yeah.
This shouldn't be too shocking, but yeah, that whole story was intense. And I was also like, what is happening? and trying to figure out. A lot of it, like I said, was like, is this the ghost? Is this, because like there's a bit where Nima is sleeping in a room with all these old dolls, which by the way, hell no. Hell no,
Yeah.
I would never. I would never.
Yeah.
And thinking that they may be coming to life or whatever. So I thought maybe that was a point of the story. Nope, that was not. That was literally like just a like distraction.
A red herring.
It was.
Yeah, and also we should mention the dad, Davy's dad, is a producer, film producer, and he was documenting all of this and planning on making it into a documentary. And so at the end, he's like, now if we make this, I can go to Ghana with y'all, and maybe we can, me and your mom can repair our relationship. So
right. So he does not want to get divorced, but the mom has been alone so often.
Yeah,
that she was just finally tired
so much
with that documentary. And he's not like, they made sure we knew he wasn't making money. Like it was just minimal. So this, if he could sell this story well, which he was doing, and he's like, he said us, me and you, Davy. And Davy, who had been trying to do some type of documentary, could be together. So, and he talks about how he had to grow up so quick just to learn about this history and seeing this conversation, and that he did really unravel a huge burden that had been over the town. But it was such a sad tale.
It was very sad, and it also relates, yes, back to, I think in the past 2 stories we've discussed, they mentioned the finding of the bodies.
Right.
And so this is sort of the, not necessarily resolution to that, but a resolution to part of that.
Right. Why there was so much. So the explanation of so many bodies were that when essentially they called it a riot because the black men were trying to search for these boys, and then they all got murdered by the white men for daring to ask questions.
Yeah.
And that's where they were buried.
Yeah. It was really sad. And it's, so like it was told, she does such a great job at writing from the perspective of a child, which happens a couple times throughout. And it was really sad when you're reading from the 3 boys and you, as the reader, know something bad happens to them. You're not quite sure what it is yet.
We don't know why he disappeared, but
you're reading their kind of perspective. And when it's just such an innocent, like they started a fire, like cooking,
right?
But they don't want to get in trouble, so they don't say anything.
Right.
It's just so sad.
And had they known how that would end, they probably would have rather told the truth.
Yeah.
But they probably would have tried to still leave. But
yeah, exactly. That's the thing.
But they wouldn't have gone through all of that so quickly. And then there was a bit that I did leave out that does haunt me, because this story will haunt me. Like I will have memories of this story for a while. But the mom searching for her son, and at one point that she did a search in that area, she just didn't know. And they think they talked about how each one died slowly in that hole, and I was like, that's unnecessary. Dude, that was unnecessary. Let's break their neck. Don't do this to me.
I love at the top, there's a forward by a friend of hers, and it's like, she's such a lovely woman and she's so happy and
so
bright.
kind.
Then I read her work and I'm like, oh, she's got a dark side.
I think all that. She's so gentle and kind, and then but yeah, so it is a compelling story.
Yeah.
And again, very haunting.
It freaked me out. Like the way the imagery unfolds of like feeling the water and it's going up and rising and the dog is barking so loudly.
The young man and Davy being like, I can, or my head is like almost like my neck is in the water. I can't do this much longer. Like it was a whole thing. But yes. So there's that one. And I think you can find that as a novella somewhere. But you should definitely buy this book.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, I also checked it out through the library.
Ooh, and this story was a great like ode to librarians, because that librarian came through.
She's like, Maybell, it's Maybell, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I found this at our local library, so I'm sure you can find this. So if you want to go read this, you should.
Yes.
And the next story we kind of alluded to a few times is called Free Jim's Mind. And literally, talks about how it's based in Dahlonega, Georgia, which you have probably heard us talk about because Anney is from Dahlonega, Georgia.
Yes.
We meet Lottie along with her husband trying to escape. So this is during the times of enslavement here in the U.S. She had been enslaved and was pregnant, and she knew she had to escape in order to save her baby. Like the dude who owned her essentially said, "I'm gonna kill your baby." She ran to find her uncle who had been freed and had owned a mine. She had hoped he would help her escape. Like he had tried to actually buy her. Previously, they refused, but she knew that he wanted her. He wanted to help her, or so she thought. He had bought a powerful luck pouch that may have helped him be freed. So it says Mojo, powerful Mojo. Soon they found him, but he was unhappy, saying he could not help her and that she doomed herself and William, who is her husband, who is younger than him and also, I believe, Native American. But they had been ousted at the same time, so obviously. But Jim did hide them in his minds after like a whole back and forth of exchange about how they were fools and they were doing this ridiculous thing and that his luck came with a cost. Yeah. And like it wasn't a good thing. Like all these things saying, you're fools, but he takes them down to the mines. It's like you have to sleep in here for a while, and that he would be back with them the next day with a wagon and some money and some food to send them on. But in this mines, there are creatures, lots of different things, maybe coyotes, but there's one big creature that William sees immediately, and it's a giant frog-like creature that has been of like legacy to the Native Americans, called a Walassi. William saying that he has to be a man, he has to protect his family, and that those who, in the story, there's a warrior who kills it and conquers and like helps his women and families. And he says, I've got to do this. So he tries to fight it, but all of a sudden, he's gone. He disappears. Lottie feeling alone, hoping that he will come back, counting how long he can hold his breath and thinking that he may come back, is also attacked by this Walassi, and she fights it off, stabbing it with her dull knife that William had given her previously. And she just injures it, and it goes away. She just sits there and prays that he doesn't come back, the Walassi doesn't come back, also hoping that maybe William will. But soon, her uncle comes down to get her. He never questioned where William was and took her to the wagon. End of story.
Yeah, he basically said one of you is not going to come out. That's how this luck thing is going to play out for you.
Essentially, like, good luck. So, in this, Due writes, the story was inspired by a trip to a gold mine in Dahlonega, Georgia, where I first heard that a Black man had owned a local gold mine. The mine was called Free Jim's Mine, and he was indeed named James Wauclair. And she said, during my research, I learned that the little-known Georgia Gold Rush displaced the Cherokee people and set them on the Trail of Tears. I will say we did learn about that because Georgia has infamy when it comes to the Trail of Tears and the Cherokee Nation and Cherokee people. But Anney, you were saying you actually know, and you've gone to this place, right? I didn't even know this existed.
Yes. So Dahlonega is that's like where the gold rush was centered in Georgia.
Right.
And so we have a gold rush museum that a lot of people in Georgia end up going to. A lot of students end up going to. It's the center of our square, our town square. And then you can visit some of the gold mines. There's like one that's really popular. And we also have a big event called Gold Rush, and it's our biggest tourist event. And you can like fake pan for gold. But yes, I did know about this. I think in middle school, in Georgia studies, that we had a whole kind of, here's what Dahlonega is all about. Here's the history of Dahlonega specifically. And we learned about that. I told you I actually wasn't sure if it was true, just because,
right.
Some of those stories in small towns, you're like, I don't know how true this actually is. So when I was reading this, I was like, oh,
right.
But yeah, the like kind of weaving in of that with the Trail of Tears, because we did learn about that as well, and the Cherokee people. And also I have to say there is a line about how to pronounce Dahlonega in there. And I felt really bad because I actually did a whole paper on how to pronounce Dahlonega. And I can't remember. I did write about how the Cherokee pronounced it, but I probably I probably messed it up. I don't know.
So I did read obviously reading it versus hearing it. So Due does read most of these tales, I think, and she does pronounce it. And I was like, oh, well, that makes sense. I can't remember it either because I'm so ingrained with Delanaga.
Yeah.
Delinga or something like that. It was very like
it starts with a T too. It's like
Telinga or something like that. Yeah. It's really sad because a lot of the roots are gone because of colonization. And yeah, I could understand why you wouldn't believe it because it's still a red state. Like it's still a red area and it's very conservative and has always been so. So it would be hard to believe that they would allow, even if they are a freed Black person, to own something here.
Yeah.
Especially as valuable as a mine.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people can connect to this, especially if you're from the South or a red state. But, you know, that story, like especially the Trail of Tears, I can see it in my head when I was reading this, and they were like 2 paragraphs. That story about Free Gem's mine was 1.
Really?
And it was like it was still centered on white people because it was very like, yeah, this Black person had a mine
look how nice we were. Like, we weren't racist. Right. Because also remember, we also grew up in, and still is, honestly, teaching enslavement as being states' rights. So teaching the Civil War being about states' rights.
Right.
Teaching the fact that the enslaved people wanted to be enslaved because they were provided by their owners. Like that was the things that we were taught. Not only that they would sold themselves. It really wasn't white people. It was their own people.
Right.
Like all of these narratives that are very false and very like white saviorism. So for us to hear this, we're like, that's probably not true. And also the Trail of Tears was literally like, yeah, it was really sad, but they don't talk about the deaths, the murders, the rapes, the like kidnapping, all of that. Yeah. They don't talk about the decimation. They're like, they just sadly walked with food provided for. They were guarded by soldiers. Nah. No. So like all of these things that are what we grew up with, being told it really wasn't that inhumane. People make it sound worse than it is. And I'm like, well, owning people, that sounds bad. Yeah. Importing people and then trading them off, it sounds pretty bad. But they try to distance those bad guys, those bad white people versus what really happened. And they're like, So when we talk about things like why we don't truly believe, especially if we've been around long enough to know that how bad history has been skewed to make them look better, them being white people, yeah, it's hard to believe. So I wonder, I would, this is why I'm surprised more than anything else. And I'm sure this is also why Due put that as he had to sacrifice so many other things in order to have this.
Yeah. Yeah, which I thought was a really interesting take. I'll have to go back. I mean, I still visit semi-regularly and see if I can.
Does anybody actually own that property now?
I'm sure it's like a tourist.
Yeah, I just wondered if it's like in someone's family lineage. Like, is it true? Because wouldn't Jim's family heritage, like, wouldn't they still own it? And can they validate this history? That's the whole, y'all see what we're saying? Like, I knew this was going to be a whole conversation about this one.
Yes. I mean, when I was like, oh no, it's set in a lot of Georgia.
Yeah, I was like, oh, there it is. Anyway, historical context. Interesting.
I'll investigate.
So we're at The Knowing is the next story that we get to. And we meet a young girl named Nikki who talks about her having to constantly move with her mama. And they end up in Miami Beach where they met Rosa, who hired mama to tell fortunes and help at the shop. So essentially, her mom has this gift in which she can see someone's death and they know the time. She knows exactly the date. And oftentimes she knows what happens, how they die. She meets Rosa, the mother, who she says your aunt is about to die, essentially, when she does. And I believe her aunt's the one that is doing the fortune telling at this point. She's like, when she does, you should hire me.
Yeah. Yep.
So like we find this out, and then she comes, and Rosa does come, who speaks mostly Spanish, but like understands enough to hire Nikki's mama. So Nikki's mama has been through so many things. She just yells out dates, has gone through like, I mean, if I knew everybody's death, I think I would not be completely whole. Like, I think there'd be so much trauma just knowing people's deaths. So she obviously goes through some things to the point that at one point Nikki gets removed by CPS, and then she finally gets her back, all these things. So they often move. When things happen, when things fall apart, or when, as Nikki says, Mama has one of her bad days, they leave. So they're there in Miami, and they're doing pretty well thus far, as she works with Rosa, and they're pretty much like best friends. They actually get along really well. As I said, Mama could see people's death, and she often did so with or without being asked. So sometimes she would just abruptly tell it, really upsetting people. In a fight with Rosa, she tells her death, even though Rosa had already said, don't do this. Do not tell me. Stop. So because of all of that, it kind of gets her fired. Though Nikki is unhappy, she loves and supports her mama, especially knowing Rosa was commenting about her parenting, about the fact that, Nikki was not getting all of these things and needed these things. And so mama was not happy. And in that fight, that's what she used against her, as her death date. As we see them resolve to leave, Nikki says, "You're taking care of me, mama, better than anybody." "Sure am," mama said, still looking at me. And then Nikki says, "I got to until May 12th, 2005, I said, squeezing her hand again, and mama just closed her eyes. So essentially, she got into a fight with Nikki, mama did, and she said, and you're gonna be gone this date, and told her the date, which was May 12th, 2005, of her death.
I think she was gonna be 15.
She's gonna be young, 15. So she was like, and that's where Nikki just accepted it and was like, yeah, okay. I got till that point.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was a really interesting look at how that knowledge affects some people. Because some people saw it as like, I only have this much time, so it's almost a new lease on life, oddly enough. And then some people, they're just devastated, even if they have a long time left. And so here's what Due said about it. "This story speaks to the fear of mortality that underlies much of my work. Nikki's mature perspective on his own brief life gives me strength." Which, yes, we've been saying Nikki as her. But
I've been saying that. I really thought of her as her. Maybe that was just in my head the entire time. I didn't really note that. I knew a young boy talks to them. For some reason, I thought it was a young girl. Okay, that was on me.
Oh, good.
And Nikki's tricky because it could be, like, I know Nikki's usually with an I at the end. So I guess that could have been my clue, but in my head it was
some of these it is because it's when it's told from this case in the perspective of a child, it's not as easy to pick up on. So
right.
I get you.
Anyway, but yeah, so obviously they're talking about death and trying to like deal with death, and like the mama talks about how she predicted all of her family's death, and even when they did try to avoid it, they still died, maybe in a different way.
Yeah, and that kind of got her cut out of her family, and her mom especially was not talk to her. Yeah, because she kind of blamed her for all of it. I mean, she lost 2 children and her husband.
Right.
Yeah,
and she was going to live a long time, and she was unhappy about that. And then the other fact is that you can die earlier than the date.
That was the only time someone, got a different date because
he thought he was immortal till that point.
Yeah,
and then he got him killed. But yeah, so all these things like on this level of like these powers and these understandings. So it was one of those that I'm like, oh my God. Oh my God, did she just say what I think she said? What did he just say? Now I have to change that perspective in my head.
Yeah. It is a X-Men power. I would be like, why did I have to get this one?
This is the most useless power and I don't want it.
Yes.
I'm just going to be upset and never attached to people ever. Like,
yeah. I think that is a plot of a lot of, I mean, clearly we think about that a lot. When are we going to die?
Right.
But I think it's a plot of a movie and a music video where somebody can see like the time.
Yeah, that it is. I think it is a movie. I've seen that.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
There's a lot of death in this one, obviously. So we go on to the next tale, which is Light Daughter. This one was a different one. Like, this one was like such a different genre that it threw me off. So let's start. This is a haunting tale of motherhood. We meet Denise and Paige. Denise had gone through years of childhood trauma, but always had her friend Paige. As she got older, Denise decided she wanted a perfect life that she couldn't have before. Had a whole plan, was able to get money to be a part of the new Copycat Babies program. So essentially being able to clone whatever in order to have children. And this was cloning yourself, I guess if you're the mother, to have a child, for this child. 3 months later, it was banned. But Denise, she got her baby in right under that ban. Many call the creations soulless and unethical. So these were soulless babies, and many people wanted this destroyed, this thing, ideal destroyed. And though Denise did try, the perfect life didn't work. Sean, who answered an internet ad post, had left her. They had gotten married with this idea, not necessarily because they liked each other, but was an arrangement. And Denise and Niecy, who was just the name of her child, are all alone. And Denise couldn't stand to be with this child. She couldn't stand to see her. She couldn't stand to be around her, and asked Paige, the friend, to come and get her. Paige was also very much against this as well, and actually very freaked out by this child because this is an identical replacement of her childhood friend who had gone through so much trauma. So all the things that she remembers about her childhood with Paige, and even with Denise, and even Denise talking about how she had wished she was Paige's sister instead of living the life that she had. So all these things, and even to the point like when Denise was like, "You come and get her. I don't know what I'm going to do to her." So she had made a promise to their mother.
Yeah, to
Paige's mother.
Paige's mother, yes.
That she would take care of that child. Because I think Paige's mother knew this was not going to go well. So she did follow that through and went to go pick up the child. The child was very upset and confused. And she was like, "Where's daddy?" And the conversation was like, the child was so freaky that the father, Sean, would beat on her as well. And that she looked at this young replica and would see the haunted sadness and could understand why Denise could not look at her anymore, because it was a reflection of her own sadness. And to see it replicated was too much. And so she takes the child, and that's the end. Yep. I had to go back 3 times. I was like, wait, what? Who's Niecy and who's Denise? Because when Denise was younger, they called her Niecy. So they would go back and forth. And I was like, I'm confused. I don't know what's happening. Not realizing exactly. I was like, okay, they are talking about cloning, right? Is this cloning? And in it, at the end, Due says it was inspired by goat cloning, and asking why would someone want to clone themselves or herself? And I was like, yeah, why would you? Why would you?
I love this one.
This one freaked me out more than, like, the ideal freaked me out.
Yeah. It was freaky, and it did not go. I tell you, that copycat baby thing came out of nowhere.
Like, it doesn't fit anywhere else in here, but it
even
does.
In the story, I was like, wait. Whoa. Okay, what are we talking about?
Where did sisters jump into?
But I was confused by the name. I was like, wait, what? And anyway, by the end, it was so creepy because Paige she was seeing like her childhood friend. Like, she was not seeing this child as a separate person. She was seeing like, that is my childhood friend. And Denise had wanted to give herself this perfect life, which of course is never going to happen.
It's never going to work.
Yeah, it was good. I mean, it's an interesting thought experiment of what happens if you clone 2 people and they have 2 different lives.
Right.
I don't know. I liked it though.
Even thinking about it, like, creeps me out. I was like, no, why? It gives you a lot of thoughts. Like, trying to find, like, it does have that conversation. Like, she does, I don't know if she meant to, but the lying of that perfect life and trying to fix your childhood by using that daughter, like, which often happens. When I have my own kids, I'm going to do this better.
Yeah. And this is just like a much more scientific way. It also has interesting conversations about the soul and what is the soul, which, yes, we as humans love to talk about that. But it was cool to see it play out in like the Supreme Court where they were debating.
Right.
What is a soul?
What is a soul? I mean, that's the question, isn't it?
I know, and that's what we got into some of this mess.
It's okay, we're okay, everybody. It's fine.
Well, clearly, we have a lot to say about a lot of these stories, so we're going to split this one in two. But really, go read this book if you have interest, if you can. It's so good.
Right. Take this break to go get this book and read it all and then come back with us for the second part.
Yes. One day, I think that was like our original intent. We should do a more interactive book club.
Yeah,
we'll have to think about that. Yeah.
It's because we stopped doing social media. We're like, no, we can't.
Because we were going to announce. Yeah, that's true. But now you have a chance for the second half to go read up. But yes, in the meantime, if you have thoughts about any of this or any other suggestions, you can email us at hello@stuffmomnevertoldyou.com. You can find us on Blue Sky at Mom Stuff Podcast or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff Mom Never Told You. We're also on YouTube. We have a TeePublic store and we have a book. You can get wherever you get your books. Thanks as always to our super producer, Christine, our executive producer, Maya, and our contributor, Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff Mom Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.